Section 9 of Little Journeys to the Homes of Great Scientists. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Little Journeys to the Homes of Great Scientists by Albert Hubbard. Chapter 9, Part 1. William Herschel. The great number of alterations of stars that we are certain have happened within the last 2 centuries, and the much greater number that we have reason to suspect to have taken place, are curious features in the history of the heavens, as curious as the slow wearing away of the landmarks of our earth on mountains, on river banks, on ocean shores. If we consider how little attention has formerly been paid this subject, and that most of the observations we have are of a very late date, it would perhaps not appear extraordinary were we to admit the number of alterations that have probably happened to different stars within our own time to be 100. Quotation by William Herschel, provided by the author. William Herschel, born 1738 in the city of Hanover, was the 4th child in a family of 10. Big families, I am told, usually live in little houses, while little families live in big houses. The Herschels were no exception to the rule. Isaac Herschel, known to the world as being the father of his son, was a poor man, depending for support upon his meagre salary as bandmaster to a regiment of the Hanoverian Guards. At the garrison school, taught by a retired captain, William was the star scholar. In mathematics he propounded problems that made the worthy captain pooh-pooh and change the subject. At 14 he was playing a hautboy in his father's band and practising on the violin at spare times. For music he had a veritable passion, and to have a passion for a thing means that you excel in it. Excellence is a matter of intensity. One of the players in the band was a Frenchman, and William made an arrangement to give the parlez-vous lessons on the violin as payment for lessons in French. This whole brood of Herschel children was musical, and very early in life the young Herschels became self-supporting as singers and players. "It is the only thing they can do," their father said, but his loins were wiser than his head. In 1755 William accompanied his father's band to England, where they went to take part in a demonstration in honour of a Hanoverian, one George III, who later was to play a necessary part in a symphony that was to edify the American colonies. America owes much to George III. Young Herschel had already learned to speak English, just as he had learned French. In England he spent all the money he had for 3 volumes of Locke on the Human Understanding. These books were to remain his lifelong possession, and to be passed on, well thumbed, to his son more than half a century later. At the time of the breaking out of the 7 Years' War, William Herschel was 19. His regiment had been ordered to march in a week. Here was a pivotal point. Should he go and fight for the glory of Prussia? Not he. By the connivance of his mother and sisters, he was secreted on a trading sloop bound for England. This is what is called desertion, and just how the young man evaded the penalties, since the King of England was also Elector of Hanover, I do not know. But the House of Hanover made no effort toward punishment of the culprit, even when the facts were known. Musicians of quality were, perhaps, needed in England, and, as sheep stealing is looked upon lightly by priests who love mutton, so do kings forgive infractions if they need the man. When William Herschel landed at Dover, he had in his pocket a single crown piece, and his luggage consisted of the clothes he wore and a violin. The violin secured him board and lodgings along the road as he walked to London, just as Oliver Goldsmith paid his way with a similar legal tender. In London, Herschel's musical skill quickly got him an engagement at one of the theatres. In a few months we hear of his playing solos at Brabant's aristocratic concerts. Little journeys into "the provinces" were taken by the orchestra to which Herschel belonged. Among other places visited was Bath, and here the troupe was booked for a 2 weeks' engagement. At this time Bath was run wide open. Bath was a rendezvous for the gouty dignitaries of church and state, who had grown swag through sloth and much travel by the gorge route. There were ministers of state, soldiers, admirals of the sea, promoters, preachers, philosophers, players, poets, polite gamblers, and buffoons. They idled, fiddled, danced, gabbled, gathered, and gossiped. The "School for Scandal" was written on the spot, with models drawn from life. It wasn't a play, it was a cross-section of Bath society. Bath was a clearing house for the wit, learning, and folly of all England, the combined Hot Springs, Coney Island, Saratoga, and Old Point Comfort of the kingdom. The most costly church of its size in America is at St. Augustine, Florida. The repentant ones patronize it in Lent. The rest of the year it is closed. At Bath there was the Octagon Chapel, which had the best pipe organ in England. Herschel played the organ. Where he learned how, nobody seemed to know. He himself did not know. But playing musical instruments is a little like learning a new language. A man who speaks 3 languages can take a day off and learn a 4th almost any time. Somebody has said that there is really only one language, and most of us have only a dialect. Acquire 3 languages, and you perceive that there is a universal basis upon which the various tongues are built. Herschel could play the hautboy, the violin, and the harpsichord. The organ came easy. When he played the organ in the chapel at Bath, fair ladies forgot the pump room, and the gallants followed them, naturally. Herschel became the rage. He was a handsome fellow with a pride so supreme that it completed the circle, and people called it humility. He talked but little, and made himself scarce, a point every genius should ponder well. The disarming of the populace, confiscating canes, umbrellas, and parasols, before allowing people to enter an art gallery is necessary, although it is a peculiar comment on humanity to think people have a tendency to smite, punch, prod, and poke beautiful things. The same propensity manifests itself in wishing to fumble a genius. Get your coarse hands on Richard Mansfield if you can. Corral Maud Adams, hardly. To do big things, to create, breaks down tissue awfully, and to mix it with society and still do big things for society is impossible. At Bath, Herschel was never seen in the pump room, nor on the North Parade. People who saw him paid for the privilege. In England about this time, look out for a shower of genius, the almanackers might have said. To Bath came 2 Irishmen, Edmund Burke and Richard Brinsley Sheridan. Burke rented rooms of Dr. Nugent, and married the doctor's daughter, and never regretted it. Sheridan also married a Bath girl, but added the right touch of romance by keeping the matter secret, with the intent that if either party wished to back out of the agreement it would be allowed. This was quite Irish-like, since according to English law a marriage is a marriage until limbus congeals and is used for a skating rink. With the true spirit of chivalry, Sheridan left the questions of publicity or secrecy to his wife. She could have her freedom if she wished. He was a fledgling barrister, with his future in front of him, the child of strolling players. She, the beautiful Miss Linley, was a singer of note. Her father was the leader of the Bath orchestra, and had a school of oratory where young people agitated the atmosphere in orotund and tremolo, and made the ether vibrate in glee. Dr. Linley's daughter was his finest pupil, and with her were elucidated all his theories concerning the 16 perspective laws of art. She also proved a few points in stirpiculture. She was a most beautiful girl of 17 when Richard Brinsley Sheridan led her to the altar, or, I should say, to a dissenting pastor's back door by night. She could sing, recite, act, and impersonate in pantomime and Greek gown the passions of fear, hate, supplication, horror, revenge, jealousy, rage, and faith. Romney moved down to Bath just so as to have Miss Linley and Lady Hamilton for models. He posed Miss Linley as the Madonna, Beulah, Raina, Ruth, Miriam, and Cecilia, and Lady Hamilton for Susanna at the Bath, Alicia, and Andromache, and also had her illustrate the virtues, graces, fates, and passions. When the beautiful Miss Linley, the pride and pet of Bath, got ready to announce her marriage, she did it by simply changing the inscription beneath a Romney portrait that hung in the ante-room of the artist's studio, marking out the words Miss Linley and writing over it Mrs. Richard Brinsley Sheridan. The Bath porchers, who looked after other people's business, having none of their own, burbled and chortled like siphons of soda, and the marvel to all was that such a brilliant girl should thus throw herself away on a sprig of the law. "He acts too, I believe," said Goldsmith to Dr. Johnson. And Dr. Johnson said, "Sir, he does nothing else," thus anticipating James McNeill Whistler by more than 100 years. But alas for the luckless Linley, the Delsarte of his day! Poor man, he used words not to be found in Johnson's dictionary, and outdid Cassius in the quarrel scene to the Brutus of Richard Brinsley. But very soon things settled down. They always do when mixed with time, and all were happy, or reasonably so, for ever after. Herschel resigned from Brabant's orchestra and remained in Bath. He taught music, played the organ, became first violinist for Professor Linley, and later led the orchestra when Linley was on the road, starring the one-night stands and his beautiful daughter. Things seemed to prosper with the kindly and talented German. He was reserved, intellectual, and was respected by the best. He was making money, not as London brokers might count money, but prosperous for a mere music teacher. And so there came a day when he bought out the school of Professor Linley and became proprietor and leader of the famous Bath orchestra. But the talented Mrs. Richard Brinsley Sheridan was sorely missed. A woman soloist of worth was needed. Herschel thought and pondered. He tried candidates from London and a few from Paris. Some had voices, but no intellect. A very few had intellect, but were without voice. Some thought they had a voice, when what they had was a disease. Other voices he tried, and found guilty. Those who had a voice and spirit had tempers like a tornado. Herschel decided to educate a soloist and assistant. To marry a woman for the sake of educating her was risky business. He knew of men who had tried it, for men have tried it since the time of the cavemen. A bright thought came to him. He would go back to Deutschland and get one of his sisters and bring her over to England to help him do his work. Just the very thing. It was a most fortunate stroke for Herschel when he went back home to get one of his sisters to come over into Macedonia and help him. No man ever did a great work unless he was backed up by a good woman. There were 5 of these Herschel girls. 3 were married, so they were out of the question, and another was engaged. This left Caroline as first, last, and only choice. Caroline was 22 and could sing a little. She had appeared in concerts for her father when a child, but when the father died, the girl was set to work in a dressmaking and millinery shop to help support the big family. The mother didn't believe that women should be educated. It unfitted them for domesticity, and to speak of a woman as educated was to suggest that she was a poor housekeeper. In Greece of old, educated women were spoken of as companions, and this meant that they were not what you would call respectable. They were the intellectual companions of men. The Greek term of disrespect carried with it a trifle of a suggestion not intended, that is, that women who were not educated, not intellectual, were really not companionable. But let that pass. It is curious how this idea that a woman is only a scullion and a drudge has permeated society until even the women themselves partake of the prejudice against themselves. Mother Herschel didn't want her daughters to become educated, nor study the science of music, nor the science of anything. A goodly grocer of the Dutch school had been picked out as a husband for Caroline, and now, if she went away, her prospects were ruined. Ach, mein Gott, or words to that effect. And it was only on William's promise to pay the mother a weekly sum equal to the wages that Caroline received in the dressmaking shop that she gave consent to her daughter's going. Caroline arrived in England, wearing wooden shoon and hoops that were exceeding Dutch, but without a word of English. In order to be of positive use to her brother, she must acquire English and be able to sing, not only sing well, but remarkably well. In less than a year she was singing solo parts at her brother's concerts, to the great delight of the aristocrats of Bath. They heard her sing, but they did not take her captive and submerge her in their fashionable follies as they would have liked to do. The sister and the brother kept close to their own rooms. Caroline was the housekeeper, and took a pride in being able to dispense with all outside help. She was small in figure, petite, face plain but full of animation. All of her spare time she devoted to her music. After the concerts, she and her brother would leave the theatre, change their clothes, and then walk off into the country, getting back as late as 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. On these midnight walks they used to study the stars and talk of the wonderful work of Kepler and Copernicus. There were various requests that Caroline should go to London and sing, but she steadfastly refused to appear on a stage except where her brother led the orchestra. About this time Caroline wrote a letter home, which missive, by the way, is still in existence, in which she says, William goes to bed early when there are no concerts or rehearsals. He has a bowl of milk on the stand beside him, and he reads Smith's Harmonics and Ferguson's Astronomy. I sit sewing in the next room, and occasionally he will call to me to listen while he reads some passage that most pleases him. So he goes to sleep buried beneath his favourite authors, and his first thought in the morning is how to obtain instruments so we can study the harmonics of the sky. And a way was to open. They were to make their own telescopes. What larks! Brother and sister set to work studying the laws of optics. In a second-hand store they found a small Gregorian reflector, which had an aperture of about 2 inches. This gave them a little peep into the heavens, but was really only a tantalization. They set to work making a telescope tube out of pasteboard. It was about 18 feet long, and the board was made in the genuine pasteboard way, by pasting sheet after sheet of paper together until the substance was as thick and solid as a board. So this brother and sister worked at all odd hours pasting sheet after sheet of paper, old letters, old books, with occasional strips of cloth to give extra strength. Lenses were bought in London, and at last our precious musical pair, with astronomy for their fad, had the satisfaction of getting a view of Saturn that showed the rings. It need not be explained that astronomical observations must be made out of doors. Further, the whole telescope must be out of doors so as to get an even temperature. This is a fact that the excellent astronomers of the Mikado of Japan did not know until very recently. It seems they constructed a costly telescope and housed it in a costly observatory house, with an aperture barely large enough for the big telescope to be pointed out at the heavens. Inside, the astronomer had a comfortable fire, for the season was then winter, and the weather cold. But the wise man could see nothing, and the belief was getting abroad that the machine was bewitched, or that their Yankee brothers had Lawsonized the buyers, when our own David P. Todd of Amherst happened along and informed them that the heat waves which arose from their warm room caused a perturbation in the atmosphere which made star-gazing impossible. At once they made their house over, with openings so as to ensure an even temperature, and Prince Fusiyama Noguchi wrote to Professor Todd, making him a Knight of the Golden Dragon on special order of the heaven-born Mikado. The Herschels knew enough of the laws of heat and refraction to realize they must have an even temperature, but they forgot that pasteboard was porous. One night they left their telescope out of doors, and a sudden shower transformed the straight tube into the arc of a circle. All attempts to straighten it were vain, so they took out the lenses and went to work making a tube of copper. In this, brother, sister, and genius, which is concentration and perseverance, united to overcome the innate meanness of animate and inanimate things. A failure was not a failure to them. It was an opportunity to meet a difficulty and overcome it. The partial success of the new telescope aroused the brother and the sister to fresh exertions. The work had been begun as a mere recreation, a rest from the exactions of the public, which they diverted and amused with their warblings, concussions, and vibrations. They were still amateur astronomers, and the thought that they would ever be anything else had not come to them, but they wanted to get a better view of the heavens, a view through a Newtonian reflecting telescope. So they counted up their savings and decided that if they could get some instrument maker in London to make them a reflecting telescope 6 feet long, they would be perfectly willing to pay him £50 for it. This study of the skies was their only form of dissipation, and even if it was a little expensive, it enabled them to escape the pump-room rabble and flee boredom and introspection. A hunt was taken through London, but no one could be found who would make such an instrument as they wanted for the price they could afford to pay. They found, however, an amateur lens polisher who offered to sell his tools, materials, and instruments for a small sum. After consultation, the brother and sister bought him out. So, at the price they expected to pay for a telescope, they had a machine shop on their hands. The work of grinding and polishing lenses is a most delicate business. Only a person of infinite patience and persistency can succeed at it. In Allegheny, Pennsylvania, lives John Brashear, who, by his own efforts, assisted by a noble wife, graduated from a rolling mill and became a maker of telescopes. Brashear is practically the one telescope lens maker of America since Alvan Clark resigned. There is no competition in this line. The difficulties are too appalling for the average man. The slightest accident or an unseen flaw, and the work of months or years goes into the dustbin of time, and all must be gone over again. So when we think of this brother and sister sailing away upon an unknown ocean, working day after day, night after night, week after week, and month after month, discarding scores of specula which they had worked upon many weary hours in order to get the glass that would serve their purpose, we must remove our hats in reverence. God sends great men in groups. From 1740, for the next 35 years, the intellectual skies seemed full of shooting stars. Watt had watched to a purpose his mother's tea kettle. Boston Harbor was transformed into another kind of Hyson dish. Franklin had been busy with kite and key. Gibbon was writing his Decline and Fall. Fate was pitting the pits against Fox. Hume was challenging worshippers of a fetish, and supplying arguments still bright with use. Voltaire and Rousseau were preparing the way for Madame Guillotine. Horace Walpole was printing marvellous books at his private press at Strawberry Hill. Sheridan was writing autobiographical comedies. David Garrick was mimicking his way to immortality. Gainsborough was working the apotheosis of a hat. Reynolds, Lawrence, Romney, and West, the American, were forming an English school of art. George Washington and George III were linking their names preparatory to sending them down the ages. Boswell was penning undying gossip. Blackstone was writing his commentaries for Legal Lights Unborn. Thomas Paine was getting his name on the blacklist of orthodoxy. Burke, the Irishman, was polishing his brogue so that he might be known as England's greatest orator. The little Corsican was dreaming dreams of conquest. Wellesley was having presentiments of coming difficulties. Goldsmith was giving dinners with bailiffs for servants. Hastings was defending a suit where the chief participants were to die before a verdict was rendered. Captain Cook was giving to this world new lands, while William Herschel and his sister were showing the world still other worlds, till then unknown. End of section 9. Recording by Steve Chilvers, Norwich, England.